I was in a session yesterday with a one-on-one mentoring client, and one of the threads that we were pulling and speaking to was the power of bringing something up as close to the moment as possible versus not bringing it up, say something between two people, and letting it kind of spin. And in that void space is when the mind can kick in and start to make meanings of what it thinks went on. And we can start to really get invested in our version of what went on. And the story that came to me to share was earlier this year, I was having a medical procedure and it required an injection just before the procedure. And I was sitting in the chair waiting. The nurse came over, checked my details, and she strapped up my arm and put the needle in. And the needle was already in my arm when she said, "Oh, and now I'm just going to go through the side effects with you, the potential side effects." And everything in my system just went, "This is wrong. The timing of this is wrong." And I immediately looked at her and I said, "We should have had this conversation before you had the needle in my arm." And she froze, and the other two student nurses who were observing froze. Everybody went, "Whoa." And and she said, "You're right. Would you like me to stop?" Like, she immediately met me where I was at and said, "Would you like me to stop?" And that wasn't a yes for me. I said, no, that's fine. Keep going. I just want to say we should have had the conversation already. And she said, "You're right." And she said, "And also you could have asked me." And in that moment, the whole thing was clear and complete. I could have asked her. She's right. And the piece for me that I started to look at in reflection in the context of this client session was, it was done. That moment was one and done, and then I went on to have the procedure, went home, and it was complete for me. If I hadn't have said anything, if I had have not self-advocated in that moment, then the story gets very different. It then starts to color my whole experience, and then my retelling of it becomes about her being the villain and me being the victim. And then I get to make meanings. And then I also probably will loop in a few more things that I think she did wrong, or the hospital did wrong, or the doctor did wrong, or, it starts to flavor the whole experience. When actually the rest of the experience was fabulous. It was a new hospital. Everyone was great. Very little waiting time. Like, the whole experience was great. But if I had held on to that piece, then my storytelling could have gone, "Oh, and I couldn't find a car park. And do you believe that the car park is really low, so my car with roof racks can't fit in?" Which was true, by the way. Um, and the young anaesthetist thinks that he's some superstar on Grey's Anatomy, and when he put the cannula in, it hurt like crazy. Also true. I could have focused on all of these other kind of glitchy things that I perceive weren't done right. Or I can tell the truth about the whole thing, which was, there was a moment, cleared it up with the nurse, everything else was great, the hospital was great, everybody was great, and it's done. But if I leave that gap, it leaves space for me to get very invested in making myself right. And then my mind will go into overdrive doing its job, which is to gather data, and it'll have a slant on it. Gather this information that's wrong, and they did that thing wrong, and that's also a bit wrong, and I should make a complaint, and I'm going to post a review, and we can really kind of get kind of wound into this right making versus the cleanliness of handling it in the moment and go, "Actually, something about that felt off." The other person gets a right of reply, and it can be cleaned up really quickly versus that gap, the meaning making going on. Maybe the other person has no idea about anything, and then there might need to be a clean up further down the line, but usually it's gotten a little bit gnarly or a little bit festery in between. And so we spoke about that story as a smaller example of how we can do that in life, how we can learn to stay fully home with ourselves enough so that if something is off, we have the capacity to self-advocate in the moment or very close to the moment and speak to what needs to be said.